Members of the audience, could you please take a seat, please? Thank you, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome guests to the meeting of Tempe Historic Preservation Commission of November 8th. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. 6:03 p.m. I always forget this clock's a little faster. So welcome to the meeting, and we will go ahead and do a roll call. And I think that normally I am doing that now, so let me just go ahead and go down the roll. Commissioner Kuroki.
Here.
Vice Chair Fackler.
Here.
Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Robinson.
Here.
Who we have? Commissioner Davis. Are you online, Ms. Davis? I see your name anyway.
Yes, I'm just inept. Present.
Welcome. And I believe we have two absences, Commissioner Montero and Commissioner Williams, correct? Okay, well, we have a quorum. Thank you very much. And moving on to agenda item 1, call to audience, persons wishing to address the commission. Do we have any cards or any presenters at this point? No? Very well. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 2, approval of September 13th, 2023 meeting minutes. Commissioners, you have a copy in your meeting materials. Do we have any comments or edits for said meeting minutes?
Chair, Commissioner Engel here. My apologies for the delay. I was having some WebEx difficulties, but I am present for the meeting.
Oh, yes. My apologies, Commissioner Ingalls. Welcome. So we have an additional commissioner. Thank you. Welcome. So this is from September, 2 months ago, since we skipped October. Any comments or edits? Hearing none, could I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
So move.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you very much. All in favor of approval of the meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. All right, moving on to agenda item number 3 tonight. We have a presentation by Logan Simpson on design plans for the City of Tempe's 8th Street Streetscape project. And do we have Mr. Case here tonight to present?
Good evening, commission members. My name is David Case. I work for Logan Simpson, an environmental design firm located here in Tempe.
Good evening. Welcome.
Is that queued up?
Yeah, it should be queued. Should be the next slide. Should be yours.
All right. So to start us off, by way of explanation, I think it's September 14th, we presented to the 4 Southern tribes. And it constituted basically about 13 of the slides you're going to see tonight. We've progressed the design of the 8th Street multi-use path a bit, so we've added some slides of that progression of design, and also included some of the cultural slides that were included in a little separate presentation from Mr. Lechner. So this first slide shows us some of the existing elements that we have there. Obviously, we have railroad tracks that are due to stay. That's upper left and lower right, along with quite a few utilities. And then on the upper right and the lower left, we have a couple of elements that are from the SRP MIC Otham community gardens. The one on the upper right is a depression that collects water. It passively collects water and feeds the plant material within it. And on the lower left, we have a terracing element. And so we've attempted to take these elements and design them for use in an urban environment. So they're a little more stout, a little more in place, a little more architectural. But we hope to use some of the passive dry farming methods that our Native American folks have been using for centuries and beyond. So we have some folks that are far more familiar with the cultural and archaeological aspects of the project, but these are from the excavation of what is known as Feature 7 on site. And I don't know if we have a laser pointer or I could point to that, but you can see, I believe it's a chalk outline footprints of the builders of this. So it's just an amazing ceremonial house. You can see the scale of it there with the tripod, 2x4, and the folks working there. And this is an aerial view of that. I don't know if we want to have somebody come up and describe what the elements are, or just speak to them. I do not know what they are, so I wouldn't feel comfortable commenting.
I can at least say that archaeologically.
Chris, you want to come?
Oh, I'm sorry. So basically, this is a massive, some sort of massive structure. We're only get part of it. Looks like we have the southern part. It extends north into the adjacent lot, but you can see the walls are all very thick adobe, up to 1 meter in places. Sometimes, some of the rock-lined flooring you can see, and some of the other major features. And Andy could probably speak if you want to speak to the
Yeah.
That was Chris Garrity, also with Logan Simpson, and this is Andrew Darling, also with Logan Simpson as well.
Thank you, members of the commission. I'm Andy Darling, the ethnography lead at Logan Simpson. And some of the interesting features of this particular structure, known as Feature 7, is it's what some people would refer to as a vaki, or ancient ceremonial house, and includes features like a circular column base, or post support. There might have been at one point 2 of those present to help support the roof, but also in the left side you see the smaller room, which is where the footprints were located. That room yielded an enormous amount of saguaro pollen, and this is a good indication that they were storing saguaro fruit there, and most likely using that for preparation of a ceremonial wine for the rain-making ceremony. Which continues to be practiced today. So the significance of the structure as a ceremonial site and ceremonial architecture is really pretty incredible and unique to find within the Tempe urban city limits. And so it is what the Salt River, Pima Maricopa Indian community and Gila River Indian community would call a traditional cultural property. And as I understand it, and Chris may be able to speak to this a little bit more, the structure itself was preserved in place. So it was basically sealed with geotech fabric and then backfilled. So this particular feature, unlike the features around it, has actually been preserved and will be, hopefully preserved in perpetuity as part of the wishes and consultation with the affiliated tribes. So really kind of an amazing discovery and find. Completely unanticipated, but also demonstrates that features like this are things that, even though we have a great deal of knowledge about the traditional tribal oral histories, things like this can sometimes surprise you when you're out working in the field. So it's a pretty exciting and very dramatic and culturally very sensitive structure.
And then we have a David Case once again for those online. Just a point of view, perspective view of that same excavation that we saw on the aerial.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead, Commissioner.
The cut down through the middle of that excavation, is that made by the archaeology team, or is that something that was a part of the original?
Yes, this is Chris Garrity again with Logan Simpson. Yes, that was made by the archaeological team. So what we do, when we started this, all we see is the flat surface with the railroad on top. We had the railroad remnant, or at least a section of the railroad, removed and stored, and I believe the city still has it in a storage facility. And then we archaeologically tested a systematic trenching with 20-meter trenches that are kind of spread out across the area This is just one trench that happened to go right through the middle of that. So yeah, all that trench, and I believe the trench going north-south or sort of like slightly northeast, southwest through there are also from us. They're us basically ways that we expose profiles of the floors of that. So it is part of it. Mhm.
So that's fairly common, I assume, but
Yes.
when you discover something like this, would you not stop the trenching and try to dig that out by hand to find
Well,
out
you
what it
often
is?
don't see it. Like we do the trenching first, and then we clean the walls. Often it's not super obvious. I wasn't out there at the time, so I couldn't tell you exactly, but we couldn't tell exactly what we were seeing until we cleaned the walls. So after the trench was dug. So that first big trench going through the middle was the original exploratory trench completed during testing. Then we realized we had something big. We were able to see those walls in profile, and they were very thick, and they supported something very substantial, possibly several stories high. And so, you know, we knew that this was going to be something big. We didn't know exactly what it was. At first, we thought it might have been a platform mound. So, you know, at that point, all we have is what we could see in the trench. And so we went back with the city, negotiated with the city and the 4 southern tribes to come up with a plan for excavating it and plan, you know, exposing it horizontally as we've done here. And so this is basically, you're seeing the end result of a very long process. So, and as in the port of, you know, during the course of exploring it, we have to do several of these trenches just to, so we can get both a horizontal and a vertical profile of the feature.
Okay, so then is the plan then to retain it in place
Yes.
and do something over the top
It's
of
already
it?
been backfilled with clean fill and
Mhm.
covered in, what's the fabric? Geotech fabric.
Okay,
So it's being protected from the elements and it's been reburied. So it's,
okay.
what you're seeing now is how it will be in perpetuity,
Mhm.
and the design is meant to maintain it that way.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and David Case, once again, I'll speak more to that, but I was not, I just recently got involved in the project about 6 months ago, but as I understand, there was data testing that happened in 2015 or 2016, 2017, when the 95% plans were created for this project, and then this, along with some other finds, put that project on hold. And then the redesign that we were brought into was, you know, out of respect and location for these items. Okay, so this is a plant material list, and all of these plants are on the City of Tempe approved list. They're also from the SRP MIC approved list. And we've worked with Jacob Butler, who is a council member, to provide us with the Otham name for that, and that's underlined on the top of each one. And there's also information there that talks about the cultural impact or importance of that plant to the tribe. So this is our first rendered concept of the new layout, and there's really 4, other than the multi-use pathway you can see in white, snaking its way through the site. There are 4 items there. There's the vertical spiral on the west, the spiral mound, which is located atop of feature 7, a vato, which is the Otham name for shade canopy that's set to the east, and then the spiral basin, which is on the far east. So the spiral basin and the spiral mound are the urban interpretations of the elements that we saw at the SRP MIC Community Gardens. We're trying to maximize, this is good overview, we're trying to maximize the amount of trees that we have on this project to shade the walkway. You know, just very pragmatically, the railroad was laid on the flat ground on the north side of 8th Street, and so all of the utilities, or the vast majority of them, were set south of that. So there's a lot going on there, and it takes a lot of choreography to figure out where the trees can go. Not only do we have the utilities, but we have the public utilities, the wet utilities, that have offset restrictions, and we have SEPTED that have restrictions about what plant can go where. So it's a very detailed, very highly studied planting plan that's happening for this. And if there are questions at any time, please stop me.
I have a quick question. Is that on the north side of 8th Street?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So pretty much all of the development that we're doing is on the north side of 8th Street between Rural and Dorsey Road. Yes. So we were hoping to locate an element similar to the spiral mound, basically at the corner of Rural Road and 8th Street as sort of a signifying element or a gateway element to the project. But when you look at everything's going on over there with the railroad tracks, the utilities, the overhead power line, there is very little ground space to do anything. So this concept was developed for a vertical spiral. It's a very iconic element. And on the next slide, I'll get into the detail of the construction of it. But suffice it to say that it takes a very little ground space. It's anchored to the ground with a 10-inch diameter pipe. The idea is that it would be fabricated out of Corten steel, and it would be a hollow box. Hollow other than some struts that go through it to add rigidity so that we don't have to have that pipe go all the way through and have it look like a lollipop. I should say now, a clockwise spiral is a culturally significant element to the Otham people, and that is something that Jacob Butler had proposed for the project. We did design this. The design team that Logan Simpson designed it, but this is an ancient symbol that holds a lot of meaning. And I would just say that it has its interest in symbology in 2 dimensions and also in 3 dimensions. One of the things that Mr. Butler suggested is that we add those 4 figures, the SRP, MIC, Otham figures. And the idea is that this is a pathway and they're starting their journey. This is our initial concept for the spiral mound, which is located atop Feature 7. Basically, the clear space that you see outside of that is the rectangular clear zone for Feature 7. Our initial concept was to leave this area completely alone and not do anything on top of it, because that's what we thought that the Native American folks were looking to see. I think I can speak from quite a few conversations that we had. There's a real concern on their part that if what exists there is known to the public, that somebody's going to try to excavate and take those things away. So rather than, or beyond just leaving it alone, the idea is to build something on top of it. And this is a proposal for a 3-foot high earthen mound with a stone spiral, once again counterclockwise. And they wanted agaves, they wanted the spines to be a hindrance or an obstacle for people to excavate there. The 4, creosote has a deep meaning to the Otham people, and the number 4 is a sacred number. That's the reason for that. You can see sort of this light gray donut that encircles it. That's actually a swale, which is about a 6 or 12-inch deep depression. And the idea is that rain would fall onto the mound and fall into this and from the surrounding areas. That would be held there and would percolate into the soil, and it would use that water as a resource. You can see here that we have the existing walkway, which is 4 feet wide, and then we have the proposed multi-use path. The total width of those 2 elements is 10 feet, and we were able to stay completely outside of that clear zone for Feature 7. This is a section through that element. You can see the swale. You can see kind of the relationship of the creosotes. It will appear on the mound as if it's terraced, even though it is a spiral. And there's a person there to kind of give you some scale about what's going on. This is on the far east. This is sort of the yin to the yang, for lack of a better term. This is the depression of that. It's the exact same spiral, but it's about 2 feet deep maximum. And instead of creosote, we use boulders because creosote don't like to get their feet wet. This is intended to hold water. And we're using grasses instead of agave for the same reason. Grasses will put up with being inundated with water, where agaves will not. And this is a section through that. So this is our first slide beyond what we showed to the 4 southern tribes. This is the advancement of the designs. In the upper left, you see the vertical spiral, and I've highlighted it in orange. It's very hard to see. You can see the overhead electrical line there with the E in it. The hatched 45 line work there is the site visibility triangle that we need to keep clear. And we've got gas lines and utilities in there. So we're being optimistic that we can locate the vertical spiral in that location. It may have to move to the southeast a bit. And then to the right of that, we have the spiral mound. This is a design development level layout for the planting design. And as you can see, there's hatching around that shows the clear area for feature 7. And working with the tribe, it was decided not to leave that open, but to bring in brittle bush and saguaros and agaves and boulders, which is typically the planting that they would have had in ceremonial houses like this. So we have 4 groups of 4 boulders and 4 saguaros, and 4 times the 4 groups of 4 with the significance of, or the 4 being a significant number to the tribe. And then in the bottom, we have the DD level, design development level layout for the spiral basin. So we have a lot of history on this site, and that is a wonderful thing. But we have some competing interests too. We have some folks that like railroad tracks, and we have some folks that don't like railroad tracks. Some folks that feel like the railroad tracks came in late and they should be removed. So what we're attempting to do is to please everybody, I guess. And we understand that the railroad tracks are not going anywhere. So when we presented the 4 southern tribes, these elements were located in the gaps in the track, with the idea being that there's given back some prominence of this Native American site and these features in the gaps in the track. And I think that went over quite well. There are a number of nodes or respite areas along this path. This is not just a path to get you from A to B, but it's an enjoyable element unto itself. Some of those nodes are all clear of the path, and some are integrated with the path as well. This initial design is intended to show alternate layout to planting that pays homage to the agricultural nature of this Native American site. I know the previous design had a lot of built and factory designed seating and site features, and we've abandoned that and are proposing that we use flat boulders for seating, which is a solution that the Native Americans really thought was a better solution. And this is just a section through what that'll be. And these boulders will be hand selected so that they're generally flat on top, and they do function as seating. This is designed from Jacob Butler, and it's intended to be the roof of the Vato or the Ramada. There's 4 elements on top. What those elements are, I don't quite know, but once again, the number 4 shows itself. Below that, what looked to me like agricultural layout is actually rain clouds. And then we see those 4 Otham figures again in the sun. And then below that, waves that basically give homage to the proximity to the Agua Fria River. That was so important to them. So we took this design and we put it into our details. And this is currently what's proposed, a 10-foot high element that's 16 foot by 16 foot. The material would be all steel, and it would be finished to emulate Core 10 steel. If it was Core 10 steel, it may actually rust onto the concrete below, so we're trying to avoid that. And then we're proposing to have 4 interpretive signs that speak in generalities about the importance of the site without saying this is there, go try to find it. And one sign would be at the gateway at the intersection of 8th Street and Rural. There'd be 2 signs by the Vato, and there would be 1 sign at the gateway over by Dorsey and 8th Street. These are examples, very similar signs that have been approved by the Native American folks and by the city of Tempe. So these would be very similar to what we're seeing here. And oddly enough, or happily enough is probably a better way to put it, there is a picture of a petroglyph that is a counterclockwise spiral. This is the approved light fixture for the area. It's a real concern to the Native American folks to protect views. So we are proposing that we use a 12-foot pole instead of 16-foot. And as of today, we do have approval for that. And that is an image of the head fixture of that. That is the conclusion of the slides that I have. I open it up to you folks for any questions, comments, or concerns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Case. That was a good presentation. And yeah, I noticed a couple of other added elements since you gave that presentation at the Four Southern Tribes meeting last month that I'd like to first open it up to commissioners for any questions or comments.
Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner.
I noticed that there are some trees that are overhanging the multi-use path. How tall will those trees be? As a cyclist, I guess I'm always concerned about running my head into branches and, getting swiped by foliage.
Yeah, so they're all desert trees, and I could go through the list, but they'll be at least 25 feet by 25 feet. The ironwoods will get bigger than that, but the idea is that they'll be at least 5 foot off of the path, and they'll be trimmed up so that when you're on a bike, you won't come into contact with those thorns or branches.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any further? Yes, Vice Chair.
Who will do the maintenance? Is this City of Tempe maintenance by City of Tempe crews?
I believe that is correct.
Will there be a maintenance manual as part of the leave behinds on this project?
That is not a scope item that we have, but we have as a firm done many of those booklets. So that's something that we could talk about if that's a concern.
Because this isn't your normal run-of-the-mill neighborhood park. I mean, these plants need tender loving care, and a lot of that care is just to leave them alone.
Mm,
And,
Yes.
somebody overzealous could really do injury to the concept.
yes, that is a very perceptive comment, and
So,
landscape
Zach-
architecture
Zach,
see that
I
all the
hope
time.
you're listening, and
I am. Yeah, that's a good suggestion, Vice Chair. Yeah,
that would be a fairly simple addition to this contract is to that kind of leave behind.
yeah.
Because they've done all this research, especially all the consultation with the Four Southern Tribes. They know the importance, and that can be put in a document with instructions of how to maintain this in a proper manner.
Yeah. Either way, I think we're looking to cut the. We're not looking to expand the budget at this point, but but yeah, no. I think there are other ways though, to make sure that information is available to our maintenance teams, because that's a great point. Yeah, we don't. Yeah, one, we want to protect the plants, but also we want to protect the feature 7 and the other the other elements that were discovered as part of the archaeological testing and data recovery. So yeah, we'll make sure that it isn't treated as just a run-of-the-mill site.
Thank you. Thank you. Great presentation.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any further comments or questions? None. Then I'd just like to echo as well. It's as I've seen this before, I think it's an excellent design. I like how it's respectful and attentive to the concerns of Salt River, Pima Maricopa Indian community, as well as Gila River Indian community. I think it's, kind of blends it with the landscape elements well. It doesn't, overemphasize, and it kind of, really does a nice job of building in with the landscape and what should work quite well. So I would like to ask Zach at this point, we're not asking for any action from the commission on this. So at this point, this is an FYI.
Correct. Yeah, that's
And
correct.
I would say we wish you luck with the rest of the project, and we look forward to seeing this implemented.
I appreciate it, and thank you for your time. I'd just like to close and be very honest and practical. We're in design development, we're in for review with ADOT and with the SRP. So the plans will change. We will do everything we can to keep the spirit of the design, but it's a dynamic process with a lot of eyes on it. So I appreciate your time again. Thank you.
Very good. And I mean, I don't necessarily see a need for this to come back to the commission unless there's significant changes, but sounds like you're on the right track, so good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good presentation. Moving on to agenda item number 4, presentation by Logan Simpson on the forthcoming Hayden Butte and Papago Park Preserve Management Plan. Mr. Colbank and Mr. Southard, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to be speaking about the Papago Preserve Management Plan. With me here is John Southard, as you all know. There are some other individuals other doctors such as Andy and Chris who may participate as well in this presentation, but we would like to share with you what we're doing. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm sorry. So you can see some of the names on the slide here. You also can see that on this project, we also have Jacob Butler to help us determine plants and animal species that are significant to the Native American community. We also have Dibble Associates, and they are actually going to help us determine the boundary limits of the Papago Preserve on the north end, north of Tempe Town Lake, and you'll see why in just a second. And here's the reason why. You can see the Papago, the preserves are really two preserves. One is the Papago north of Town Lake, and the other is the Tempe Butte, or Hayden Butte, as most people know it, south of the river there. You can see that on the north side, the boundaries are very irregular, and there's a lot of things going on in there, particularly with SRP, has a number of easements and right-of-ways, and so our consultant is intended to flesh those all out so that we have a good handle on those aspects of the project. The things we'll talk about here, we've talked briefly about the team members and the project location. What I really wanted to share with you is the overall scope of work that Logan Simpson has agreed to and is performing on this particular project. Also about the cultural resource activities that we're undertaking as part of this, and a basic identification of the scale or the schedule of the project as we move forward. The scope of work that Logan Simpson has 4 phases. The first phase is really essentially your data gathering, collecting all the information you can. That includes the things that are on this slide, the physiographic types of things, topography, soils, geology, drainage, and of course, flora and fauna. In that flora and fauna, we have our staff biologists who are looking for any kind of special status species, Noxus species, which we know there's some out there. And then the species of travel concern is where Mr. Butler will be helping us here. So this will be the one part of the phase 1 activities that we'll be undertaking out there. And these areas will be identified, and we will have a map of each one of these showing where they are and the various aspects about them. Another component of phase 1 is to identify all of the existing recreation amenities and the uses that are happening out there. It's not just a matter about the natural components, the trees, the vegetation, and so on and so forth, but the city already has invested, such as at Holman Park, you've got a restroom building. You can see in this image, there's a footbridge that leads you to the path up to Loma del Rio. So there are a number of things that also have to be identified, because as we start to look at the management of this particular area, we want to know all the resources that we have within our grasp that must be dealt with along with those different uses. And we know there are a couple uses in there that may have may create some excitement for some people. Some may not prefer that they be there, but they are occurring at this point in time. So we want to make sure to document those. Again, following just in the scope of work, of which we are contracted to do, is we will be having 4 workshops. The first workshop is actually Monday of next week, and that is to introduce the project to the general public, as well as our stakeholder groups and others. And the idea is to basically identify where the project is, what it is that we're trying to do in terms of a management plan. We're not trying to redesign, we're trying to manage and set up management activities to provide a greater protection of the resources, whether man-made or natural. And then issue or solicit from them any ideas about their goals or their goals and objectives for those, so that we can look at the resource management and try to identify if there are any other kinds of uses or programs that we might want to incorporate into the management area. The second workshop is really just to kind of take a look at those goals that we heard and the themes that might come through that first workshop, and then try to, in a mapping form, identify zones or management zones, not necessarily individual features, but the zones of management that might have different characteristics, so that we can begin to hone in on where some of those management activities might need to change, be altered, or otherwise modified. So workshop number 2 is to present those and get feedback from stakeholders and the public on those kinds of things. Workshop number 3, we're still in phase 1, okay, and there are 4 phases. Number 3 is basically Logan Simpson will come back with all of our resource data, our archaeologists, our historic preservation folks, our ethnographers, biologists, other folks who have studied the sites, and present a management plan, which some of that will be geospatial, in other words, a map that shows those boundaries, and the other will be the kinds of recommendations about management activities. And the idea there is that we're trying to hone and carry forward those themes from the prior meetings, so that we can cull out of that the kinds of activities that we really want to see and want to have in there. Workshop number 4 is really just to come back and share what those are with the public and with the stakeholders. So those are all part of phase 1 of the study. Now, at the same time that all of these are taking place, we will have a number of different cultural resource studies and activities going on. And so I'm going to turn this over to John and or Andy, whoever feels the need, to go ahead and explain that to you.
Thank you, Wayne. I appreciate it. Chair Woodson, members of the commission, thank you for your time this evening. So for the cultural resources component, I'm excited to announce that there is underway a Class 3 survey for Tempe's portion of Papago Park, Papago Preserve. There has never been a Class 3 survey for Tempe's portion of Papago Park. Phoenix has completed a Class 3 for their portion. For those of you who are not archaeologists, a Class 3 is above and beyond a Class 1. A Class 1 is essentially a literature review, identifying what is known, what has been documented, etc. whereas the class 3 is going out into the field and walking transects and identifying artifacts, features, et cetera, that are visible on the surface, documenting that. So having that information is absolutely critical to be able to identify management practices, areas to avoid, et cetera. So that is a very exciting piece of information or pieces of information that are being collected here. We are also tasked with outreach, consultation to particularly Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community and the Gila River Indian Community. In our scope, there are 2 meetings with the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers for both Salt River and Gila River. One of those has been completed at this point. The second meeting is to occur down the road. There's also an optional field visit, and I believe Dr. Andrew Darling in his portion will be discussing that, because that's really going to look at both what was identified during the class 3 survey, but also factor into the traditional cultural property study. At the moment on our side, additional tribal consultation is not scoped. However, the city will be engaging in additional tribal consultation to assist with developing management recommendations and helping to identify the preferences of the 4 southern tribes, particularly as represented by the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community and the Gila River Indian Community Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. And although it is not on this particular slide, I know Wayne Cobank had referenced Jacob's role in this, and Jacob is going to be partnering with our colleagues who are biologists at Logan Simpson, who have gone out and completed the biological surveys looking at flora and fauna. Jacob Butler is going to be assisting them with understanding what species of flora and fauna may be of significance culturally and help to identify uses, et cetera. And in addition to being able to note that and factor that into management recommendations, those will presumably also be of value as relates to the traditional cultural property study, a traditional cultural property being something defined by a National Park Service bulletin, Bulletin 38. And that we're very fortunate to have Dr. Andrew Darling on our team. He is an ethnographer. And Dr. Darling, if I may call upon you to speak to the traditional cultural property study component.
Thank you, John. Chairman Woodson, members of the commission, as part of the cultural resource investigations in phase 1, we will be conducting a traditional cultural property study and or TCP study. TCPs are National Register eligible properties, normally or most commonly identified under criterion A for eligibility, which are important to the perpetuation of traditional culture in Native American and traditional communities. And so we'll be actually evaluating the findings of the Class 3 survey, as well as other aspects of the study area, the various buttes, rock formations, even stands of plants with regard to their continuing significance to the affiliated tribes, and most significantly, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community and the Gila River Indian Community. That research will be include visits to archaeological sites in the study area. As you may have noticed, the study area includes Hayden Butte, which is already an acknowledged traditional cultural place or property, as well as the Papago Preserves themselves. And since we haven't had as comprehensive a cultural resource survey before, we already anticipate and know of some traditional cultural properties that exist in that area, and those have been identified in the recently completed Tempe City treatment plan or blanket plan. So we'll be actually going back out and further documenting those. So the study includes not only just a literature review, but we will be looking at the traditional song culture of the Yakima O'odham and their oral traditions with regard to the area. And there are quite a number of interesting cultural places and histories, oral histories associated with the preserves, and we'll be documenting those as part of the study. And this will include interviews with tribal members, community elders, and cultural experts. And as part of that study, we've been very lucky at Logan Simpson to bring on board a cultural specialist, a young Akimara O'odham man named Jonathan Curry, who is, I say young, but he's a traditionalist and singer, and is really very well prepared in traditional culture. So we're benefited by him working with us on our crews closely to identify these places. So as part of this management plan, we'll be making recommendations as far as the management of these culturally sensitive locations and the kinds of activities that will work very closely with the tribes that can be allowed there or can be allowed to continue in those locations. So that'll be another part of this phase 1 research.
Thank you, Dr. Darling. And Chair Woodson, members of the commission, of note to the Historic Preservation Commission, and something that that does not directly pertain to archaeology, traditional cultural properties, or flora and fauna of tribal concern. There's also, of course, the investigation of potentially eligible historic resources, to include the Michael Goodwin designed amenities in Evelyn Hallman Park, to include the former Curry Road alignment that is now used as a trail, to include culverts, et cetera, the historic railroad cut in the area of Papago Preserve south of Curry. For your information, that is also an aspect that we are going to be investigating and evaluating. And with that, I will turn the presentation back over to Wayne.
Actually, Chris, would you want to say anything more about the Class 3?
Sure. Hello, everyone. This is Chris Garrity again, for those of you online. Chair Woodson and members of the commission, we did complete the Class 3 survey, the archaeological survey, last week, so it's sort of fresh off the presses. We haven't gotten to the point yet. I don't have any maps or a report to show you, but there were some very surprising findings of far more substantial preservation of sites than we expected. And without getting into too much details, these are, I think, will be very, very sensitive sites that our consultation with the tribes, I think, will have to concentrate on what the city can do and how we can develop this management plan for their continued preservation, because some of them are at risk just from the constant use of the park, the use of bikes, vehicles, pedestrian traffic, and there are items on the surface that are highly, highly sensitive. So just to put this on this radar, we may be here again discussing some of these items when I have more information, or when we have more information. Thank you.
Chair, is it possible to ask a question midstream here? So perhaps to Chris, what was the boundary of the Class 3 survey?
It is essentially the map shown earlier, but only north. We only did the Papago
Northern
Preserve
part?
portion, north of, and so north of 202 and north of the river. Because the Tempe Butte / Hayden Butte portion has been pretty thoroughly documented, we didn't think it warranted a new Class 3 survey. It is well known to have, extensive rock art that's been thoroughly documented by Chris Lohendorf of the Gila River, who's now with the Gila River Indian Community, and some others. So we really only concentrated on that sort of blocky area that Wayne showed earlier in the map.
Great, thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, we move on to phase 2 of the scope. Phase 2 is predicated on all of this information that we gather about the site, the information that we have from the cultural resource, various studies and TCP evaluations that are being done. We now then have our hands around this. We know what resources we have and how really the cultural resources are going to influence the management plan To what extent, we don't know at this point in time, but as part of phase two, that will be the issue that we will wrestle with, is how to move forward. What are the preserve management goals? We're expecting that the public will have maybe some new goals that we might want to incorporate. But the point is that we, as a group, will be developing these management goals and some probably qualitative and or quantitative metrics or criteria about how well we can get to those and how well they were successful in achieving those. So the goals would be the first thing. And then in phase three, we would develop these best management practices, which would be, now that we know how we want to go forward in managing, what are the specific things that we're going to need to do? What do we need to change? What are we going to do differently now than we've done in the past? So it could be dealing with operating procedures, such as, recommendation of we're going to do trash pickup, 3 times a week instead of 1 time a week. Could be something like that, as an example. But these steps that we're going to take are the steps that will lead us to achieving these goals that have been set out by the group and by the stakeholders and by the city. So that's phase three. And then in conclusion, phase four is slightly different in that through this process that we've just described, we will see, and we've already seen some, we're already aware of some items that right now need to be fixed or corrected or modified in some way. And I'll give you an example. The path that goes up to Rio, I'm sorry, goes up to Loma del Rio, obviously needs some repair work. That is something that, if the money were available, could happen almost immediately. So that would be in what we are terming here a near-term kind of project that we will be identifying. There are going to be more that are a little farther out, a near-term as we describe it, and a long-term action. And so we're going to categorize a lot of these things that we see and try to put them into a priority list so that people can make decisions. Planning can happen to, if it happens to be capital improvement money, the money can be budgeted, be ready to go. But also the idea would be to look, once we have our hands around that, to look at where the partnerships might be and where the funding sources might be to take care of some of these over the short or long-term process. So that is the basic scope of work, as we thought this would be an easy way to kind of explain what we're trying to do here. And obviously, this is how we've tried to explain it to you. Hopefully it makes sense, but certainly there's room for questions and opportunities for adjustments. But this would be the plan we would move forward with from here. So that concludes the presentation. Obviously, each of these gentlemen are still here, so any questions you have, we're certainly glad to try to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Colbank and others. Appreciate the presentation. And I mean, yeah, I thought very, very well laid out in terms of your scope and your plan of action here. So let me just first open it up to commissioners if there's any questions or comments. The Vice Chair.
Anticipated timeline for the project?
Dave, I'm Commissioner.
Dave is fine.
I forgot the next slide, which was the anticipated schedule. So you're right on target. This is a brief schedule that's put together. I don't expect you to be able to read everything, but what you'll notice is about that first 6 months or so, starting from the left. So we got a notice to proceed kind of in September-ish, and we're kind of about 2 to 3 months in, but we're going to have another 2 or 3 months again to sort of get our hands around a lot of this data and all the information that we've got. Then we will spend another 4 to 6 months working our way through the management plan, the goals, objectives, and all of the different projects that we might identify and the funding sources and things like that. So I'm sorry it's not very readable. One thing I do want you to recognize is that there are about 2/3 of the way down, there are some green stars. One of them is a presentation to the DCC. The other is a presentation to this body. And you'll notice that somewhere out farther into the project, we will be back to give you another presentation of where we've ended up in this process. Well, maybe not where we've ended up, but where we are near where we're going so that we can again get your feedback and comments.
Thank you.
Question?
Yes, Commissioner.
So I'm curious, you talked about workshops in phase one, and that the first workshop is actually this coming Monday.
Uh-huh.
Do you have those other workshops scheduled? And second part of that question is, how are you advertising those if they are open to the public?
Yes. Let me just say, the second, third, and fourth workshops are not scheduled yet. We have been working with community development and neighborhood development with Shauna to schedule those. And once we get past this one and we determine kind of how the information and data is coming to us, we'll lock on to a time frame for that second one. Probably in the end of February, maybe into March would be the second one. Now she has and knows that there are certain periods of time where we just don't want to have a public meeting because people are out of town, spring breaks and stuff like that. So we have to work around those kinds of things. But everything is planned through Shauna and through that group as for the timing, and each of the meetings has been advertised through the city's network. It will all be on the city's website. So it's advertised in numerous different ways, and frankly, I can't identify them all at this point. Yeah.
Yes.
I can add a little bit. So
Okay.
anything that goes through the neighborhood services in terms of advertising the meetings, we use the city's Facebook, the next house, the multimedia email list, and also the website. So it will be advertised.
Yeah, and the advertisement is well out in front of the time of the meeting. So there's plenty of time, at least 2 to 3 meetings or weeks for sure that I'm aware of.
So as far as advertisements, do those just go out to the neighborhoods or all of Tempe?
So Chair Woodson, Commissioner Robinson, as Dr. Edakari had mentioned, Neighborhood Services does promote this in conjunction with city public information officers, through city social media channels. It is available through the city website. We have confirmed with Shauna Warner of Neighborhood Services that notification postcards have been mailed out to residents within, and I do apologize, I don't know the precise distance, but there is a city protocol for notification. Postcards have been mailed out. In addition, they've taken steps such as publicizing the meeting in the newsletter that is sent out with the City of Tempe water bills, which is a surprisingly effective medium. It reaches far more people than perhaps one might anticipate. Then there are also groups who are interested in the preserves that have publicized this of their own volition. And so it has reached a number of stakeholders. In addition, I know Dr. Lechner, I believe, has sent out notices to both the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community and Gila River Indian Community Tribal Historic Preservation Offices. So there has been a wide net cast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further? Yes,
I have a question.
Commissioner?
So I'm not sure where the boundary of the Hayden Butte study area is, but how would the Hayden Mill development get integrated? Because I feel like I remember some of the trailhead design or design was part of the development. And I don't know where they are at the timeline right now, but do you have any plan? Are they part of the stakeholders, or could you touch on that?
At this point, I personally am not sure how that boundary works between that development of Hayden development and of the Butte. I know that the city has passed, I think, a development agreement with someone, but I don't have that information at this point in time. At least the information that we got, if you could look on the mapping, shows that very northwest corner of A Mountain there, essentially being blocked out. That, I assume, is the boundary line between those two projects. I can't guarantee that this line that is here is totally accurate. We do have, as I said earlier, a consultant who's working on trying to define where those lines are. So there may be some deviation here, but this is the best recommendation that we have at the moment as to where that line is.
Thank you. It seems like at least some kind of conversation should be involved to coordinate whatever the public goals
Agreed.
and the development.
Chair.
Yes, Dr. Adhikar.
Yeah, just to add to the commissioner's question, they are already referring to the draft Hayden Butte Preservation Management Plan is already there, which kind of assesses and also has some of the diagrams that is already with the city. Now, they will be building something which is more of a preserve management plan rather than the buildings and historical structures. So my guess is, and maybe Jack can also add in, my guess is once this plan is done, the RFP that is going along with the flour mill, that would be kind of coordinated by the designers and the planners. So this will, the city, because the city owns both of those kind of documents, that's something that we can work on. So that's a very valid question. Even the first time when there was a RFP done for the flour mill a couple of years ago, that was exactly the kind of situation that was connected to the trailheads and all that. So that's something that the city will be very cognizant about.
Yeah, I think that trailhead plan, which is going to be eventually kind of carried out by Venue Projects and Sunbelt Technologies, is really kind of in its really brainstorming nascent phases. So they're kind of just concepts at this point. So that is something that will have to be kind of coordinated later, but I expect, and we'll make sure that it is. Yeah.
Chair, question?
Yes, please proceed.
So since we have the map up, on the north side of the river, I'm curious about the boundary of the survey. Is it just within the blue lines, or, I mean, a survey tends to bleed a bit. I mean, is it just within the blue lines?
Yeah, well, the
Blue boundaries?
physical survey, the Class 3 survey will be literally between the blue lines. As part of the preparation to do the Class 3 survey, there is an investigation of land areas around it to see just what kind of cultural resources have been located or what kinds of studies have taken place around this. But physically, all we are going to project is what is within the blue lines.
Thank you.
And you do notice that there are a couple of disconnected parcels, which is interesting. It creates some interesting management issues as well. But that's the information that we have at the moment.
Chair? Yes. So it appears that there have been some investigation in prior times or some research into this area in prior times, and some sites were identified. And just looking in the report between like south of Curry Road and north of the river, there were a number of them. In your preliminary findings in the Class 3 survey that you are working on, have you identified sites other than those in other portions of the boundaries of the survey?
I'm going to let Dr. Garrity speak to that.
I can speak to that. Thank you, Commissioner Larson.
Yeah.
Yes, that is really the major area with sites, that area between Curry Road and the river. They've been recorded there for centuries. They've been known. One of the pioneers of Arizona archaeology, Frank Midvale, recorded sites there in the 1920s for an establishment called Gila Pueblo. And it's remarkable that when we map what we found on what he found, it's pretty closely matched. Except, back then he didn't have modern mapping technologies and things. So he didn't have the level of definition that we have now, but is pretty good. So what was remarkable to us is that we found those sites and that they're still pretty much in very good preservation. So they're not as disturbed as we had thought over a century, so. And of course, there's Loma del Rio, which is the preserved site. We did document that, and it does definitely need some updating. The preservation isn't great right now. It could use some help. But yeah, you're right. Those sites have been documented. They were just never systematically recorded using modern archaeological techniques, essentially. I mean, they're recorded in the 20s and again in the 60s. And if you ever look at reports from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they're not at the level of detail we have today. And they certainly didn't have GPS technologies and things and GIS like we have now. So yeah, so it's never been systematically surveyed using modern methods is essentially what it comes down to. And the area north of Curry, to my knowledge, has never been surveyed. And we did survey that. So.
And in the area north of Curry, you found some archaeologically significant findings.
Not nearly the densities you see south of Curry, but yeah, there were a few sites up there. And there may be, I don't want to speak to TCPs at this point, but there may be TCPs up there as well. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And then I have a comment. I'm not sure who I would direct it to, but over the years in this area, the location of trails seems to have changed. The trails kind of move and go, and the nature of the surface of the ground there makes it sort of difficult to determine, like, where is the trail? And that makes it susceptible to movement in locations of paths in there. Have you explored how to maybe keep trails in one designated spot in terms of the management plan? Is that something that is sort of in the purview?
One of the things we have discussed with parks and parks management is this idea of prioritizing trails, and some of the trails that are out there may go away. Now, there's been no decision about any of that, but the idea is that, and I'll relate this to another sort of trend or practice really that's going on in the federal government, and that is on BLM land, forest land, and other large land managing agency folks. They have lots and lots of miles of acres of land that is being driven on by four wheels, motorbikes, whatever. There's a lot of wildcatting going on in terms of the trails. The push is to reduce those trails down to the ones that can be best managed, and those trails that are not desirable to be restored. And that's what we know in the contracting world as it's called travel management. Not sure why it's called travel management, but that's the word they gave to it. But that's the idea, is to shrink down the number of trails only to the ones that you can best manage. And that may be a concept here that comes into play, because it's we do have a lot of trails. They're going in a lot of different directions. Do we need all of them or not? That question has not been evaluated yet. And of course, then you have other things. you know, you have the hikers and the bikers, well, the hikers per se, then you have the folks on bikes. And then you have this newest thing, which are the e-bikes, which are electric powered bikes that you see running around with kids in their neighborhoods or wherever they are, which give you a lot more power and a lot more ability to go in different places that it's not human powered at that point, or not totally anyways. We don't know to what extent those are all contributing to some of these additional trails, but that will be one of the discussion points of trying to sort out which trails stay, which ones go.
All right, so thank you for that. In terms of feedback on the management plan, I'd like to see that. Would you use the term in the contracting world, travel management?
Travel management.
I'd like to see a travel management component in the management plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
It is a practical problem for parks management now that all of these trails are out there. And we have discussed in the field meetings, what can we do about that and how can we, you know, take a look at that. So I'm certain there will be a component of that or an element of that in the management plan.
That's good. The trails are really important to the area.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit distracting when there's just so many of them going everywhere, you know.
Yeah.
That's kind of the motivation for the comment.
Yeah, understood.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good comment. Okay, any further comments? Any commissioners online that wish to ask any questions? No. All right. My only question was beyond the Class 3 archaeological survey, which is now completed, were there any other field data collection components that you're still working on, or is all of that finished?
All of the field work for biology and vegetation has been done. What has not been done is the documentation, the thorough documentation of all of the various things that are out there in the preserve. Telephone transformer boxes, telephone poles, little site walls. Some of the drainage areas have not been fully documented yet. So there are, I would say, the recreation and asset kind of stuff is still to be finished. But those are things that you go out there and there it is. And, you know, there's not any interpretation of it. It just is or isn't there. So, but I think that's the basics of the field work that still has to get done.
I see. Very good. Okay, well, thank you very much for the.
I was just going to add a little more detail.
Oh, okay, sure. No, go right ahead.
There's still quite a bit more resource documentation to do. The Class 3 was sort of designed to be preliminary to the TCP study that Annie mentioned. So that's going to be done. It was deliberately put after so they could use the Class 3 information, you know, to work with the tribes to identify potential areas of sensitivity in TCPs. In addition, I believe we still have to do the bio study. I don't believe that has done yet. There might be other resource studies. I don't know all the details, but from a historic preservation perspective, we're still, you know, toward the beginning stages. So there's still field studies to be done. Right? Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank all of you for the very thorough information. Sounds like you're well on your way, and I gather we will be seeing you again in the coming year, most likely, and we look forward to it. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, I guess moving on now, item 6 on the agenda is presentation by Logan Simpson on the Double Butte Cemetery Needs Assessment. And Mr. Colbank and Mr. Southard.
Yes, so Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity. In this presentation, I am representing the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation. They had hired Logan Simpson to develop this needs assessment for restoration of the Double Butte Cemetery. So this presentation is going to be the findings and the recommendations of that needs assessment that we had completed. And other members of the team, including John, have been there as part of that as well. So he will be available to answer some questions as well. As you can see here, this is the opening slide, has the information on it. But again, this is on behalf of the foundation who prepared this needs assessment unsolicited as an attempt to help the city to improve and restore the Double Butte Cemetery. So just wanted to be clear about that. So the kinds of things we'll talk about is this needs assessment was generally targeted towards the Pioneer section, which is only a portion of it. We'll obviously talk about our observations, some of the character defining features there, the landscape master plan that we, Logan Simpson, produced, and then there becomes a question of how does all of this stuff get done? So there's questions and issues about that, and we'll be able to raise those for you. And then there's actually the needs assessment itself and what some of those recommendations are. So we'll just get right into it. This is the Double Butte Cemetery. It is 17 acres. And the yellow area that you see in the upper central portion is the Pioneer section. It's about a little under 2.5 acres. What you'll notice is a couple things. On the far left is what we call the turfed area. This has grass, and generally the stones are all flat and the grass is mowed, and the trees are all basically olive trees that have been there for a number of years. The brown portion of the cemetery is what we call the desert portion of the cemetery, basically all dirt and gravel and other kind of surface materials. One of the things you'll note is I-10 is there in that very northeast corner. I-10, given its new configuration, is probably even closer than it was before, which raises some concern from members of the foundation about things such as vibration and visual pollution, lots of other things we can talk about here in a second. This is just zeroing in on the Pioneer section as it was requested of us. So it's A through D. And G probably also fits that category, but for this study, we were not asked to take a look at that. So those areas are basically the Pioneer sections. There's about 160 grave plots in there. And by grave plots, I mean about 20 by 20 plots, which have multiple family members or others buried within that 20 by 20 area. Just to get into some of the details, the grave markers that are out there are in every state of disrepair. For those that are in disrepair, we noticed that there are at least 50 that are either broken, fallen down, worn away, have the bases need to be, they're all leaning over. There's just an array of issues with those headstones out there. Not that there are not good things happening in the cemetery, but the things we're pointing out to you here is stuff that the foundation wants to make you aware of that could be tackled moving forward in some level of improvements. So the markers are definitely an obvious one. Also, part of the character of this is that every one of these grave plots, which are about 20 by 20, are bordered generally by something, typically concrete. Could be concrete mixed with stone. It could be brick edgings. It could be lots of different things. Many of them are in disrepair, probably more disrepair of the edgings than anything. And so this is an item that the foundation would like you to be aware of. In terms of ground surface treatments, there's just about every color of rock and gravel and other kinds of things, and many of them just have raw dirt, as you see in the upper right photo there. Most of them do not have a nice rock covering, as you see in the bottom two images. And the one image in the upper left, that is a green rock that was called leisure lawn back in the 60s and 70s. And I know John knows more about that than I do. I don't even know if that material exists anymore or can be produced, but it was a thing in its day. Okay, let's just say that. There are, in some locations, remnant wooden structures, some of them vertical, some of them horizontal, outlining grave sites, and they come in lots of different pieces, whether or not those were put in by the city or by the families of the internees. It's kind of hard to know. We also have a fair amount of settlement within those grave plot areas. We have sinkholes, we have evidence of animals burrowing, and these are all making things somewhat unsafe for those visitors going to the cemetery, particularly this pothole one in the upper right. We just found that not very long ago. But you can see there's a fair amount of disruption in the surface areas there. Some of them have fences, and I'm pretty sure that this fence didn't get installed this way, so I'm sure over time somehow something has happened to it. But it contributes to this sort of disorganized, dilapidated kind of sense that you get here in the cemetery. And trees. Trees are very important here for a number of reasons, and we'll talk about those. In terms of thinking about restoration of the cemetery, trees are going to be very important, and you'll see in the next several slides how that is. The tree in the upper left is an olive tree that obviously more than likely needs to be just cut down and removed because it's partially blocking the roads. The roads are very narrow, and so this is creating a problem. What you see in the upper right is along some portions of the cemetery, there are these semicircles, which at some point in time had trees in them, which no longer exist, and now in this particular case has a signpost. On the bottom photographs on the left, you see some oleanders. Those oleanders appear, at least in our research, to have been planted maybe in the early 2000s to maybe make up for the lack of trees. We don't really know. The balls in the photo on the bottom right, those are actually olive trees that have been pruned into balls, which should be left alone and be left to turn into trees. So these trees are out there, but there are really not very many trees at all to deal with in the visual environment. The pavement edges. The pavement edges in many cases is crumbling and broken up and very difficult to get out of your car, your vehicle without stepping on this stuff. So again, it becomes somewhat of a safety hazard. Much of this, we believe, is because the trees that were there and are there are being watered by flood irrigation in the ditches that are running parallel to the roads. And so the water is disintegrating the pavement. And in addition to that, the ditches are filling up with sediment. Now we have a drainage problem because when you think of the cemetery, you have the buttes to the south, all the rainwater moves forward to the north, and in these lower areas of the cemetery, the water has to go there, but there is nowhere for the water to go. Now, one would assume that in earlier days, the ditches helped with that drainage consideration and sort of captured some of that water and it wouldn't be spreading out all over the grave sites. But you can see that there's a definite challenge here in terms of just the pavement and how to deal with that. Like I said, the plant material is watered with drip irrigation, or I'm sorry, with flood irrigation, with a system that's chopped up, and some of it is is of a different kind in a different area. But what you can see is, particularly in the bottom left, you can see how the ditches are filled with sediment from many, many years, breaking up the concrete. And really, you can see that along that line, stretch of roadway, there's really not many trees, obviously because they didn't survive, didn't get enough water. You can see in the upper right where some of the ditches, again, are not functioning, and because of that, the water is spilling out into the gravesite areas. In the bottom right corner, you can see that there are water infrastructure, pipes and culverts that get the water under the roads, particularly at the intersections. Some of that's sticking up, some of it obviously as well filled with sediment, not functioning very well. So this is an area where clearly some assistance is needed. So let's just kind of recap here. The defining features are this fact that we have multiple grave markers of different sizes, colors, shapes, whatever, that are out there. You have a variety of the grave plot borders and edges, and then you have these multiple ground surface treatments and colors and textures and so on and so forth. Just those in their own right create their own visual character that one would look at, and it's quite busy, and it doesn't appear to be well organized because of all of these different things. But it is there, and that is the environment, the visual environment that this cemetery has at the moment. You also see the ditches. In many cases, these photos don't represent the ditches very well, but the ditches are there, so they are a character-defining element. You have the narrow roads with all their broken edges and so on and so forth. But the obvious thing that you look at when you go to the desert area is the fact that there's no trees, or very, very few trees. And what happens there is, without the trees, this becomes a very harsh environment for cemetery visitors. And if one were thinking of trying to utilize the cemetery as part of heritage tourism or anything like that, where you wanted to attract people to come here and be part of a grand plan of, you know, spreading the history of Tempe, this creates some challenges for bringing lots and lots of folks to this location. Now, what I wanted to point you at here, and we're on the line of talking about trees here now, is this a picture of from 1931? What you're looking at there, where most of those trees are, is the original sections A through D. And one of the things you can see is that you've got the grave plot areas bounded or perimeters with trees of different kinds and sizes. A pretty distinct pattern. And you can see there are some trees that kind of intermix into some of the planting areas, but clearly the trees around the edges give the visitors a chance to be in the shade, to be in the cool, so when they have to go out and look at the graves or honor the grave sites, they have some respite from that with the trees that are bordering it. Then the other thing I'd like to point you out at is that in the very sort of bottom of the photograph, sort of bottom left, there is a street that's running essentially perpendicular to Broadway. You'll notice that there's some new tree plantings in there. Those tree plantings are in a soldier file, which means they're opposite of each other. They're not diagonal from each other. And this kind of soldier pattern is one that historically we want to bring forward through the work that we've done here. So the surrounding vegetation and this lining of the streets with trees are sort of big patterns that you can rely on historically. So here we are, 2005. Now you can see from that 1936 photo, we don't have nearly as many trees and have nearly as much vegetation here. So you can start to see in that, let's say 70 years, the vegetation has gone down. In the Pioneer section. Now what I want you to look at here is that in the bottom right, you can see the cemetery. Now this is a photo looking basically at Broadway Curve looking south, the cemetery there on the right. But the eastern half of the cemetery, which is, roughly the Pioneer section area, you can see it's kind of haphazard in there, and the vegetation's not quite as uniform. It doesn't look as big. Maybe there's some new trees have been replaced in there. As compare that to a little farther back to the right, where the cemetery narrows down almost into a pie shape back there. It looks like there's some pretty good trees planted back there. They're in nice rows, even, looking very nice in terms of health and vigor. So we think that, and I have a photo of that area. Now, this is a view looking, let's say, from the buttes, looking sort of west-northwest. You can see the amount of trees that are there in that very southern tip of the desert area location. They look pretty healthy. They look pretty good. But when we start to look further, now this is a current shot, and I don't have a shot of that area to the south, but you can see here the current vegetation that we have left out there. I might point out that on that diagonal on the east side of that would be A, B over there, those areas that look like trees along the road are actually those oleanders. So those are really not trees. So again here, just reinforcing the point, you don't have many trees on this site. And what we think is that the loss of trees that were characteristic of the early part of the Pioneer Cemetery were lost starting sometime in the early part of this century, and the southern half of it also had a similar kind of pattern a little bit later. Now, what we did was we developed a master list of trees that we thought could be used to actually, if we're going to restore the cemetery with the similar patterns that we have, trees lining the roads would be the obvious thing to do. So we've come up with a plant list here that you can see. We have worked with the city's forester to come up with these species, although they could still be changed as well. And what we did was, in this case, what you're looking at here is the entire cemetery with the individual landscape plan sheets shown on them, so that we could make sure that every part of the cemetery where we thought there needed to be more trees or needed to be trees to be replaced to restore the character would be. So you can see these here. Just to drill down a little bit on one or two of these sheets, you can see the vertical street right in the middle there has trees across from each other. And what we did was we went out and we looked where these semicircles were, where there are existing trees that we could plant a tree directly across from. And so the idea here is we're restoring the planting pattern for the trees along paralleling the street, so that we are now getting back to a historic pattern that one would have seen, 30, 60, 70 years ago. And we did the same thing on this plan sheet. It happens to be that the desert area is the portion to the right, and the turfed area that has the olive trees is missing some trees, so you can see we've added some there. And so we did this master plan, and all of those sheets are available. And essentially, the plan work is done. There's still some more work probably to verify some of this, but it's essentially the plan for moving forward with the trees. Now, I said there were some questions here. So the real question about this is, who's responsible for all of these improvements that we just talked about, or how to fix all of these things we just talked about? You would think that on the slide here, the top ones, the grave markers, the borders, the edges, the ground surface treatments, and all that other similar kind of stuff would be the responsibility of the owner of the gravesite. Could be, but it would need a little bit of research into what the purchase agreement is with that owner at that point in time, because these were bought over a period of time, And so they may not all be the same. And in some cases, there may be a distinction between what the owner is responsible for and what the city is responsible for. Things like drainage and roads and planting all these trees and putting in an irrigation system would seem to be pretty straightforward city responsibilities, but that's still to be borne out. So the question there is, how do we get to that issue of who is responsible for what? So as you see on the line below the bullets there, we need a work plan of action to figure out all the things that need to get done, line them all up, investigate them, know what we need to do. So that's the work program. And then the next line down being, how do we need to do outreach, or do we need to get approvals from all the folks who are going to be affected by this work? If we put down, if we adjust or do some work to a gravestone for a parcel, do we need to tell the owner that? Do we need to advise them of that? And then in some cases, these parcels are so far internally, we're going to have to develop some kind of a system to get equipment from the roads in and over top of some of those grave sites. So it's going to be an interesting challenge as to what kind of outreach there is necessary with the grave owners. And of course, the question, if we have the grave owners, is there a possibility of some kind of cost sharing? Whether that's possible or not, nobody really knows at this point in time. But from the foundation's perspective, what can the foundation do here relative to making these kinds of things happen? I'm going to pass over this slide because I want to just move to one other item here, and that is that we were asked to put a cost estimate together for these things that we just talked about. And we searched around and we looked, thinking that maybe there was some industry or some burgeoning industry here in the West where people who do this kind of stuff exist here and could help us with cost estimating. We've never found that here. So you can see some of the tools and techniques that are used by these folks. It's very specialized, but we couldn't find anybody here, much like back east where you have lots of national cemeteries and you have older cemeteries where this is a pretty common practice. It's not necessarily that way here, certainly not at the magnitude that we're talking about. But so we had to move forward anyways and trying to come up with some cost, and we did a cost estimate. And please don't get hooked on the dollar value that you see here on this, because again, we don't know what the division of responsibility is between the city and the grave owners, and or what work can be done by volunteers and others. So please don't take that too seriously. But to get to the bottom line of the recommendations here from the foundation, this is it. This is this slide for you. The recommendations are to do a drainage study, because clearly we got water that we can't seem to get rid of, and it may have some effect on the burial areas and the roads themselves. This I-10 issue of being in closer proximity creates potential issues with vibration and noise, and even possible pollution from the exhaust from the vehicles. We need to look at whether it's beneficial now to do flood irrigation or do drip irrigation going forward. There may be, given the cost of water is going up and the way we need to be judicious about water, that may be something that we need to look at. We need some level of specifying how we're going to treat the grave markers going forward. I mean, we need a very specific study of that, like what can we do and what do we need to do, because if we're ever going to use a contractor to help build some of this stuff or do some of this work, they need to have a better program. And then we need landscape and maintenance plans, or maintenance plans for the landscape and for the headstones going forward if we're going to do any of this restoration. But the big thing is to try to get a consultant. We're assuming it's going to be a consultant, maybe not in-house, but it could be in-house, to develop this work plan, try to get an estimate on the cost, outreach to the parcel owners or the grave owners, and then try to establish a time frame in which to get these things done. And then, of course, the foundation is still waiting and very interested and keenly interested in trying to work with the city to figure out how these basic steps and these items get done and what they can do to contribute to that. So those are the recommendations. I understand it's a kind of a little involved presentation here, but I think you need to hear some of that stuff to get to these recommendations of what needs to get done. So with that, I will stop and entertain any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting review, and I certainly learned a lot. And just before I turn this over to questions, just to clarify, because you made a point at the beginning that Logan was retained by the Historic Preservation Foundation. This was not a city-funded
That's right.
study. Okay.
This was
But
an
it is a city property, right?
It is a city property, but it was an unsolicited recommendation report.
Unsolicited.
Unsolicited by the city.
By the city.
It was
Got it.
initiated by the foundation.
Okay, very good.
No, sure.
Thank you. Chair Woodson, members of the commission, first, in the interest of full disclosure, I am a board member of the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation, although to my understanding, this was contemplated prior to me joining the board, which was after my tenure with the city. But for the sake of those who are not familiar with it, the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation is a non-city, non-profit preservation advocacy group. And they were approached by a donor who, to my understanding, does not wish to be publicly acknowledged at this point, who had an interest in this property and provided funding that the foundation then used to engage Logan Simpson in this needs assessment. And the reason that we're here presenting to the commission is, of course, not only is this of interest because it is historic in a lowercase h sense, but it is also historic in the sense of portions of it being listed in both the Tempe Historic Property Register and the National Register of Historic Places. And so ultimately, should there be work done as a result of this and subsequent studies, depending upon the nature of the work, either a certificate of no effect from the Historic Preservation Office or a certificate of appropriateness from the commission would be required for portions that are subject to the Tempe Historic Property Register overlay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Southard. All right, commissioners, questions, comments?
Chair, I have a question.
Yes,
Is the cemetery currently managed by the Parks Department or some other department in the city of Tempe?
No, we understand that the maintenance is provided by Parks, but the maintenance staff splits their time between the cemetery and Tempe Diablo. And the majority of their responsibility is Tempe Diablo.
Oh, Chair, Commissioners, Alex Jovanovich, Community Services Deputy Director for Parks Services for Parks and Recreation, but on the Parks half of Parks and Recreation. So it's kind of a joint effort. So the maintenance of the actual cemetery is done through Parks, so it's a city coordinated effort. And then the record keeping and the selling of plots and the managing of that part happens actually through Recreation. To give you a little bit of background real quickly, so previously the cemetery was managed as an enterprise fund. So it was the money came in, operated it. Several years back, it actually transitioned out of an enterprise fund and was absorbed into the general fund. When that happened, there wasn't budget money allocated necessarily directly for the maintenance of it. It was absorbed within an existing budget. So it's just existing staff that took on that responsibility. That Wayne's correct in the sense that the team at Diablo Stadium, who manages the 7.5 fields in the stadium at Diablo, also took on the responsibility for burials there and then maintaining the entire area, mostly focusing on the turf area, grass, irrigation, those types of things, and then making some minor improvements to other areas.
Okay, well, thank you and welcome thanks for that information. So Tempe Diablo is also a city infrastructure, correct?
Correct,
So
yes.
that's also serviced and managed and maintained by the Parks Department or?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay, all right. So when you were saying that there's sort of a section of the Parks Department that's tasked with maintenance for those areas, the Diablo and the adjacent cemetery?
Correct. The Diablo team absorbed the cemetery a few years back as far as responsibility goes.
Got it. All right. Okay, thank you. Any further?
Not right at the moment. I'm still thinking, but thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
Chair Woodson, if I may, and members of the commission, just for context, the reason there is this discussion of responsibility, et cetera, and an important component of the question of who maintains the property and who bears responsibility. And by all means, Chair Woodson, if I get too deep in the weeds, don't hesitate to let me know. But this was something, the earliest interments date to 1888. This is land that was homesteaded. The homestead paperwork had been filed in 1888. It was acquired by an individual in 1893, Mary Cosner. It is believed that it was individuals associated with that family that were first interred there. It was later, portions were donated to, was initially the Twin Butte Cemetery Association, later the Double Butte Cemetery Association. It was a not-for-profit group, and when they sold family plots, they sold membership in their association. There was not a perpetual fund established to maintain the plots. In 1958, it was determined that it was no longer feasible for that entity to maintain the cemetery. It was turned over to the city. The city then turned it over to, the city then later turned it over to a private group that was managed by a private group very briefly. It was not economically feasible. It is now back in city control. And again, just contextually, the reason for a lot of these questions related to maintenance, costs, et cetera, is because there was not a protocol or fund established. And so there are questions relating to who is responsible, but also who is able to access and improve and or maintain plots. That is, are they the responsibility of the family, or is the city or those tasked with managing the property, are they able to actually make improvements and alterations to these plots without having to engage members of the association or former association?
Sounds complicated. So is the association still existing or not?
No, that entity is no longer in existence.
Okay.
The association, or the last iteration of the association, was disbanded in 1958. There was a private firm that briefly controlled this. Again, that was not economically feasible, so it is now back in city hands. So that is a question for individuals far more familiar with the law than myself as to who exactly now retains control and or responsibility for the plots that were afforded to members of the association.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
And then one minor follow-up question myself is that I thought I heard one of you say that there are still plots being sold at the cemetery, so it's still actively bringing in new, guests. No, that's not the right term, but that's just what popped into my mind. Anyway, I didn't know that. I thought it was just a purely historical cemetery, but I guess not.
They're still buried.
Yeah, I can comment on that. You can go to the city through the recreation department, next to the library on Rural and Southern, and you can buy a plot. They give you a deed. You can pay with a credit card if you want to buy a plot. An adult plot is about $2,500. The infant plot's about $1,000. There's still some. There's still space there, and they're still interning people, and they're still maintaining it. I mean, there's activity there. It's active for sure. And so as I'm thinking about this, like the deed, a current deed issued for a plot there there's like no terms. It's, you get this space, it's in your name. That's it. There's nothing else. And so along with that comes responsibility to maintain the curbing and the roads and the trees, and that's not written down anywhere. That would be quite a surprise to people who have purchased plots. And the people that are buried there have no comment on it. And so someone else is going to have to pay. You're not going to get anything out of them. And so what I'm wondering is, it's a city-owned property. If it's managed by the parks, this is a challenge because it needs to be repaired. If it's not draining, that causes, problems. But it's a city property, and if the only people who might contribute to paying it are actually buried there, I mean, it's what do you do? It seems like it's in the city's hands.
So I just want to comment on one point that was made. So you're correct in that it's a deed, so to speak. The language is that basically it's an easement and right of use. And even going back to the 1800s, it was basically, even on those original deeds, it was listed as a right of use, not actually property ownership, so to speak. So the city maintains the entire parcel as property. And then whoever buys a plot, for lack of a better description, has an easement and right of use. Many of the elements that was part of the presentation, such as like fencing or curbing, those things were installed, the majority of that in most of kind of what's considered the desert section, Pioneer area, were installed many, many years ago. I don't know if any of those things have been installed recently. And those things were installed not by the city, but by, families that owned, for lack of a better description, the plot. So it is difficult to manage some of that, for sure, on responsibility and where the responsibility lies and who's able to do what with and without whose permission.
Vice Chair.
Follow up to that, if you will, please. When was the last time Parks put in a CIP request specifically for this?
It's great that you asked that. We actually have this year, we are funded for a study. So this timing winds up actually being not perfect, but pretty close to ideal in the sense that there was obviously a study commissioned by donation funds through, obviously hired on Logan Simpson as a contract to go through this part of it. The city actually has money allocated in this year's CIP that we hope to get started sometime after the new year for a study. It would be a more comprehensive study, not just a section of, but the entire cemetery. And then we have money identified in the 5-year CIP starting with next year, assuming that Mayor and Council approve that budget process. We have some money allocated for next year, hopefully in the approved CIP, and then subsequent years after that as well in the 5-year CIP for improvements.
Okay. Is there, in addition to the capital improvements, is there additional maintenance funds being asked for as part of that capital improvements?
There has not been recently. There's obviously many competing interests, so to speak, in the city on where those funds go. We have not submitted, to my knowledge, we have not submitted as a community services department or Parks and Recreation. We have not submitted a supplemental specific to that to grow the budget, to ask for more money. I don't want to necessarily speak on what might come of the budget process this coming year, but it doesn't sound like there's going to be a lot of opportunity for general operating growth.
This is a nightmare, both legally and as well as maintenance and everything else that you are responsible for. Looking at these recommendations from this study, top line, hire a consultant. Sounds like you guys are in the process of hiring a consultant to do a lot of what is included here would be in your consultant contract. You've got money theoretically in the pipeline through the CIP, but what good does it do us to redo all this, rehab all this, plant new plants, if we're not going to put any maintenance behind that queue?
I think To answer your question, I think some of it's going to be based on infrastructure. So I'm making assumptions here. A lot of the lost vegetation over, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years has been, in a lot of that desert section has been because of the I'm going to call it canal system, the watering ways system hasn't functioned properly, as well as that area doesn't have traditional what I would call traditional irrigation or more modern irrigation, as opposed to the turfed areas are all irrigated, sprinklered. So any infrastructure improvements through CIP would potentially make improvements there depending on where that money's spent. I agree with you. It long term, you can't continue to just throw CIP money on top of it for infrastructure improvements, that you have to have a regular ongoing maintenance. I believe if there's an investment through the CIP, we would have some operating dollars, and there's an opportunity, even if it's not through like a budget or supplemental request through our general operating budget. There are some CIP operating impacts that we can submit for as well as part of the CIP. Generally, most of the CIP requests are for one-time spends for that capital infrastructure, but there are some that you can submit as operating impacts.
Right. Bond election looks like 2024. Have you been looking to put anything specifically related to this cemetery in that bond?
Have not yet, but I heard there is maybe some bonding capacity. I know from a parks specific area, we have a large amount that'll be requested through the bond for that, for Tempe Diablo Stadium. That's a part of an agreement that we have with the Angels as a contractual obligation.
You wish cemeteries put out that kind of money. Be real easy to maintain if they brought in a whole bunch, wouldn't it?
It would probably be easier. Yes, you are correct.
Hold still just a second. Zach, where are you at with a historic preservation bond? What kind of discussions are being had?
I'm not aware of any further discussions besides I think there was one executive session that I mentioned maybe last meeting, the September meeting, and I have not gotten any additional, I didn't get any information from there because I was not at that executive session meeting, and of course those are confidential. So yeah, I'm going to be, actually, I was thinking about that. I'm going to be inquiring about that to see what the status, if any, of that potential HP bond item is, because I know there's been some discussion and even some encouragement recently by the foundation. Speaking of the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation, they sent a letter recently to mayor and council encouraging and referencing this HP bond item. So yeah, I'm not exactly privy to where it is at this point, but I will find out more information for you and let the commission know.
I know the mayor is in a couple of fundraising modes, expressed extreme interest in seeing that there is a significant amount of funding asked for in the bond. Let's skip ahead a couple of years and assume that that was actually approved by the voters and in place. Because this is on both the local register and the national register, what kind of grant opportunities are there for cemeteries? Do they exist at the federal level or not?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, I think certainly from the state side of things, I think certainly, a Heritage Fund historic preservation grant could be a possibility, since it is, the requirement there is that that can be used for kind of, so this isn't exactly a bricks and mortar project, but it can be used for, that not just studies, but actually kind of improvements, especially that add to the historic integrity of what has to be a National Register eligible or listed site. And as Mr. Southard said, this is, listed in the National Register of Historic Places. So that's a potential funding stream. Yeah, I'm not aware of kind of other grants that would be specific just to historic cemeteries. Not to say that I'm sure they exist. I would have to research that. But it's a good idea, because I think that it's always better in terms of, and more feasible in these terms of these types of projects, to have not just kind of one pool of, be looking to use just one pool of money, but to try to find multiple pools.
I mean, month in, month out, we see a lot of people coming forth, dealing with historic properties, interested in dealing with historic properties. The city's always in a backseat position because of a lack of funding, dedicated funding, to do things. Even as such as this study, I'm glad to hear that it's in the works. Sources of funding for future improvements might be part of this study, something that should be looked at. But this is a travesty. I mean, I know where I'm going to be buried, up on the side of a hill in Boise, Idaho. But I'd hate to think that this was my only choice in Tempe if I actually wanted to be buried here. I don't know whether the foundation plans on presenting this to the council, but this is very eye-opening at what the current conditions and the condition of this cemetery is in, and it's a damn nightmare. I urge the foundation to at least present it to the council, which would hopefully garner interest in the council to move forward with other opportunities for funding. I know you're pushing a rock up a very steep hill, but somebody's got to start that rock. And I think the foundation is a group that can push that, and I urge you to do that. This is very, very eye-opening. I had no idea that the conditions out there were this pitiful. And something desperately needs to be done.
So just to
in my lifetime, please.
To support that, the Parks and Recreation Golf and WVU Cemetery Board has recently asked, in addition to Logan Simpson had provided this presentation to them as well. And then since then, they've asked to have some tours set up, so they'd like to come and visit. We have at least one board member that is an advocate for the cemetery and has been advocating as part of the ADOT Broadway Curve project for some improvements based on some of the work they've been doing. That's kind of fallen on deaf ears, though, unfortunately. But so we know we have at least one advocate, but some of the other board members also want to tour the site. So to your point, I think there is some traction being gained with other folks that might have some influence.
Thank you for your indulgence.
You're welcome.
Chair?
Yes, Commissioner.
So I have a question in terms of your scope was to deal with the Pioneer Cemetery, was it not? And it's just a part of the larger cemetery as a whole. And yet the preservation of the Pioneer Cemetery is sort of dependent on the whole.
Right.
Do I understand that correctly? I mean, are you looking to increase the aesthetic value of the entire cemetery, or just focusing on the pioneer portion?
It's my belief that the focus was the Pioneer Cemetery, Pioneer portion of the cemetery. But when you look at it, you can't look at it singularly. It's part of a whole. And so part of the idea for the tree master plan that we did was to say we can't just look here. We've got to look outside of that area. So that was the reason why that we did that, and it seemed as though that would be an activity that could be done that would help the entire cemetery. Now, if you look at some of these other tasks, like looking at a drainage study, the drainage study would have to cover the entire cemetery. You wouldn't just pick up a certain portion of it. Most of these things are suggesting a broader level of assessment than just the Pioneer Cemetery, or the Pioneer section, I'm sorry.
Well, it seems to me that the question about grants being available, historic preservation grants being available, might pertain only to the Pioneer portion, but at the same time, they're probably also going to be interested in whether or not there's any kind of backing from the city, you know, within the context of the entire cemetery, because what's the point of upgrading a small portion of it, you know, with the idea that of tourism and drawing people to it if the rest of the cemetery is in such disrepair.
Right.
Thank you. I think it's a big task. It sounds very complicated to me.
Sure. When do you have an idea of when the report is going to be available?
The report was given to the foundation a week ago, 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, maybe. And I'll just say, and John, since he is a member of the board, my understanding was that the report that we produced that actually yielded these recommendations and thoughts would be delivered to the city Parks Department as the means to start the discussion of how to go about this restoration. But John knows more about it than I do.
Thank you, Wayne. Chair Woodson, Commissioner Larson, yes, to my understanding, it is the intent of the foundation that this be provided to the city. Although the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation Board is a much smaller group than the city of Tempe, we still have our own bureaucracies. There is a committee that was tasked with overseeing this process. This is being reviewed by that committee within the foundation. I assume that this will be discussed at our next foundation board meeting, which is slated to occur in 1 or 2 weeks from this evening. If all goes well, presumably at that point, it would be cleared for release, although, again, that assumes that there are no objections or calls for revision, et cetera. But yes, it certainly is the intent. That was really the motivating force behind commissioning this, was to complete an assessment and provide it to the city so that conditions can be better understood and recommendations can be provided. And I believe it is the foundation's intent as an advocacy group to then advocate for the recommended changes and of course, associated funding.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I very strongly support this effort. This is something that needs to be done. So thank you for the information that you've provided. And yes, please support this.
Thank you. Very well. Any further? Yes,
I have a
Commissioner?
comment. So a couple of years ago, I went to the Sesca Centennial. Actually, there was a tour of the cemetery. That was the first time I've been there after living like over 30 years. It's quite large area, and I saw the disrepair, but at the same time, I saw opportunity. It's a very large open space, and it's different, like East Coast cemetery, it's very rush and different context. Or in Europe, they have this cemetery, like a park-like, and I see the opportunity at the park, like I could see people come and take a walk and walk around if it's a nice environment, and there's a definitely opportunity. Of course, it costs money to make it nice, but maybe multiple different sources, partly city, partly fundraising, or partly maybe like a communal, I don't know what they call the cemetery, like not so much individual lot anymore, but there's interest in having smaller footprints, so maybe you can raise some money. And somebody mentioned the grants, so multiple sources, I think, as I understand, it's very challenging, but there's a great opportunity there. That event was very well done. There were many volunteers dressed like historical figures, and explained who they are and at their cemetery plot. And it was really fun, actually. It was well attended. So something like that is opportunity to do the fundraising. I got definitely interested in improving that. So hopefully city fund more study, further study, and the study should include how to fund, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. All right. Any further questions or comments? Okay. Dr. Lechner, again, this is no action item for the commission, just input and receiving the information, and the report will ultimately be coming back to the city. Do you perceive any future role for the commission in this project, or?
Well, like Mr. Souther said, yeah, I mean, it would be down the road if, for example, if, certain, recommendations were kind of put into action and there was, certain changes that were, being proposed, restoration, rehabilitation, if there were changes that necessitated a certificate of appropriateness, then it would have to come through the commission for approval. Otherwise, it would likely just be handled by the Historic Preservation Office.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Logan Simpson representatives, once again, and good luck with finishing the report. And we look forward to hearing more about this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. All right, agenda item 7. We're going back to consider requests for recommendation of adoption of proposed amendments to the City Code, Chapter 14A, Historic Preservation Ordinance. Dr. Lechner.
Yes. Hello, Chair and Vice Chair and Commission. So I gave a presentation at the September meeting, so our last meeting, on proposed updates to Chapter 14A, more commonly known as the Historic Preservation Ordinance. So I don't have an eye-popping presentation like I had last time. That was a joke. But this time I just want to kind of review quickly kind of what's happened since then. You've received a report and a recommendation on the part of staff for the HPC to recommend adoption of these proposed amendments. Of course, City Council ultimately has the authority to adopt these amendments. But since this is strictly just kind of a non-property historic preservation related matter, the recommendation would just go directly then to City Council. There would be, for example, no role for the Development Review Commission like there is for some property-based historic preservation decisions by the HPC, or recommendations by the HPC. So I presented the revisions at a couple of public meetings in September. Those were pretty well attended. One was online, one was in person at the public library at the corner of Rural and Southern here in Tempe. And then just as kind of a courtesy presentation, I attended the October meeting of the Neighborhood Advisory Commission and just talked through, some of the proposed revisions, answer some questions, and again, that went fairly well. A public survey was made available in September, late September through early October. The commission did receive a copy of the results in the packet. Will have noted that there were 17 responses. Many of them, some of them there were some positive comments in there, but there were quite a few negative comments, which is not terribly surprising, just based on the fact, based on how surveys go. Often the most those who are opposed to something or tend to be the most vocal. And so, those comments were kind of ones that have been received before on various kind of historic preservation related surveys, and so wasn't too much of a surprise. But I did want to mention, based on those results, the Historic Preservation Office did decide to adjust one proposed change, and that is the proposed maximum stay period for a demolition permit for any property that's 50 years or older. That is not HE, that is not H, meaning it's not, it hasn't been classified by the commission as historic eligible, hasn't been designated by city council as historic and therefore part of the local register. To reduce that maximum stay period for those 50-year-old properties or older from 60 days to 30 days. And HPO is perfectly fine with that. I think that's a fair compromise. It still gives us a decent review period. And again, the idea, and I think there was some concern by folks that we were just going to automatically slap a 60 or a 30-day, stay of demolition on every single property that's 50 years or older that someone wants to demolish. And that's just not the case. It's there if we need it, but it's most likely that those reviews will take place, on a much more timely basis and much more quickly than that. There's some changes were made. You may have noticed in the revised document, I did provide you with a draft ordinance which would be similar to how it would be presented to council, with kind of capitalized underlined portions, noting additions, of course, cross-outs indicating those that things are to be proposed to be deleted. So some other fairly minor changes were based on additional public feedback. Commissioner Larson very helpfully provided some additional input. For example, proposing to refine some definitions, as well as some other helpful recommendations. And so I can certainly answer questions about some of those additional revisions if you'd like. But the hours are getting late, so I just want to conclude my brief presentation by just again noting that the HPO is recommending that the HPC recommend adoption of the amendments to City Council.
All right, thank you for the summary, Dr. Lechner. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments about the proposal?
Point of clarification.
Yes.
So, Dr. Lechner, you're saying that the 60 days is recommended now 30 days instead of what was previously submitted?
Right, so this is just pertaining to that new provision for properties that are 50 years or older. So it's just pertaining to demolition. So if some kind of alteration is being made to a property that's 50 years or older, there's no kind of review process whatsoever by the Historic Preservation Office. It's just if there's a demolition permit request received by the Planning Division, that would go through the HPO to be evaluated, and the HPO would have up to 30 days to review, comment, inform HPC, for example, about that proposed demolition. And then once the review is completed, the property owner could dispose of the property as they see fit, whether it's demolition or some other alternative that they may have decided upon in consultation with the HPO.
So just to clarify, I'm not that familiar with housing as it is presented to SHPO. Do they do an evaluation of the property once the permit is submitted and determine whether or not it's eligible or should be considered eligible?
SHPO wouldn't. There are situations where you can request a voluntary review by the State Historic Preservation Office. I don't see that that the HPO would be probably doing that very, very often. So really what we're envisioning here is that the HPO would just kind of take it upon itself, and I say itself, meaning myself, as the only member of the Historic Preservation Office, to review that and, do a little bit of research and some consultation with the applicant, and, could just make a recommendation, just myself, so. Yeah. But certainly consultation with SHPO is, definitely not out of the question.
Well, it probably I shouldn't have said SHPO, but with regard to submissions to your office, what kind of an evaluation is typical, particularly for housing?
Well, in the case of a historic eligible property, currently the Historic Preservation Office has 30 days, and again, the proposal, which is unchanged from the first draft here, is to increase that review period to 60 days for historic eligible properties. The review could come in kind of different ways. For historic eligible property, there might be, I might conduct some research, kind of consult the HP files, might consult our colleagues at the Tempe History Museum, might do kind of like a visual inspection of the exterior of the property. It's a little bit different, I think, in the case of a historic property that's 50 years or older, because if it's HE, we know that the HPC has determined that it has some type of historic value. In fact, the HPC has determined that it is eligible for the local register. If it's just a property that's 50 years or older, it may have zero historic integrity and have absolutely no historic value, or it may just be a run-of-the-mill ranch home, and they're a dime a dozen, and there's no kind of larger historical connection or connection to a historic figure that would somehow make them more important from a historic standpoint. So in those kind of cases where there would be probably some quick research on my part to say, all right, what does this house look like? Do we have any association with any kind of any important historic figures or larger historic trends? No, then that's where I'm getting the idea that the review process would be probably much faster than 30 days for the most part. But those would be the kind of things that I would be looking at when I would be doing a review of these kind of properties.
Thank you.
Chair, I have a comment. Yes. I've looked at the revisions and I support them. I think they're good. I think it clarifies, there's a lot of language in there that needed to be clarified, and this achieves that. It makes it easier to understand parts of it. It brings it in line with the planning and zoning. I'm sorry, not planning and zoning, but the zoning ordinance, and I support recommending the amendment to the Historic Preservation Code to City Council.
Yeah. Thanks, Commissioner Larson.
Thanks for your efforts on this.
No, thank you for yours too.
Yes, and indeed, thank you, Commissioner Larson, for your input on the various drafts. So appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Okay. Vice Chair or Commissioner Kuromi, do you have any other comments or suggestions? Very good. Yeah, I'll only, and I already mentioned this to Dr. Lechner, that, I definitely got some hyper-partisan results in there from the survey comments going on. And so a couple of them made me pause and just kind of think about it, but it's, you're going to get the whole spectrum of comments. And I really don't think that there's anything overly onerous about these proposed amendments that's going to really slow down development and progress in Tempe, and it's going to be awful and horrible. Literally, they said it's horrible. I oppose everything in this. I mean, come on. I would agree with the commissioners that I think this is timely to go ahead and get this passed. So with that in mind, unless there's no further questions, I'll entertain a motion which is written out for to read in your agenda. materials.
This is Commissioner Larson. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed amendments to the Historic Preservation Ordinance.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. And we will take a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you very much, Dr. Lechner, and any other staff who helped you with that. And again, to Commissioner Larson. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I worked with Ryan Levesque on that, so yeah, thanks to Mr. Levesque for his assistance and Mr. Adhikari as well.
Right, yes, and thank you. Appreciate your assistance. Be yet another nice update, and for these great documents and plans that we've been getting past this last year. This is all good stuff. All right, moving on then to chair and staff updates and announcements. I do not have any updates or announcements, so I'll pass it over to staff.
I have a few things, but again, it is late, so I can also just send the commission a quick email or however you would prefer me to do it.
I'm fine unless there's anything critical that needs to be brought to our attention. We could just get some email updates. That would be fine.
Okay. Yeah. Will do. So just for me, now that we're kind of started combining kind of the updates and the announcements, I'll just say that there is a plan at this point to have a December meeting, HPC meeting. Just in case, wasn't enough Logan Simpson tonight, and they were great. And that was fantastic that so many of the team members showed up. I'm greatly appreciative of them making their time, which I'll be sure to remind them of. They've completed another study, which is a Tempe Butte ethnographic study. And they had requested to make a presentation to HPC about that. And I've read a draft of that study, and it's really remarkable. So I think you'll be very interested in that. And then there's also just a request for HPC approval of the annual commission report, which is just an annual requirement of the city clerk's office every year. So, and that's all for now, but there could be more.
All right, thank you. And without trying to drag the meeting out any longer, is there any new updates for Watson's Flowers?
Oh yeah, I'll just tell you. So Bob Graham of Motley Design Group, he was hired by the city to complete a building condition assessment report, and so he is still working on that at this point, and so he doesn't have any kind of formal recommendations to make at this point. But again, it's just his scope was just to perform a building condition assessment report. The idea with the idea of whether there's any kind of potential adaptive reuse potential for a whole or a portion of the building. So that's what he's kind of currently working on at this point.
Okay, Vice Chair.
Just to follow up to that, Zach, as I understand, the TCAA's portion of the project has been significantly reduced and disconnected from the larger development or housing development project. TCAA is going to be pursuing a limited number of units, as I understand, a dozen, for the housing of battered women and children, other short-term stays up to 2 years, which creates, in my mind, a lot more opportunity for reuse of the historic building as adjunct to their much smaller project. Now, I don't know what's happening with the remainder of the site, but that to me was good news.
Yeah, I don't know exactly kind of, the extent of the project at this point. I do know that, Bob Graham is and the architects and the development team that TCA has put together at this point. Kind of there's conversations happening kind of between all of those groups, which I think is good. And that there's kind of like an ongoing, an early discussion. It's not just, I don't think it's, it's not going to be a situation where Mr. Graham just kind of, completes this and then, okay, see what you can do with this, in terms of the potential for adaptive reuse. So those conversations are happening, and I think that is helpful. I agree with you. If that is in fact the case, that there's kind of a smaller footprint and that they're looking to make on the site, then yeah, certainly there is perhaps more of a potential for adaptive reuse of perhaps the entire building. We'll just have to see. There's a lot of kind of, it's again kind of not as complicated as Double Butte Cemetery perhaps, but there's a lot of challenges and complicated issues at play there. So I think that the commission has done everything it could do on this one, and the fact that you all approved that letter to be sent to mayor and council. I know it was, as I think I mentioned to you before. I think it really was a major reason why the city manager commissioned Mr. Graham to complete the study. So I just want to let you know that your recommendations were definitely heeded. We'll continue to monitor. We'll have to see what Mr. Graham comes up with, and I'll keep you informed as always.
The information that I got was from the architect, TCAA's architect.
Okay.
They had just been brought on board.
Mm-hmm.
Then they appeared to be very receptive to alternate uses.
Yeah.
And it just, so I was very encouraged by the discussion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say they're kind of non-committal at this point, just because they can't necessarily, in this early stage, kind of be tied to anything in particular. But I have spoken with them as well, and if their feeling is that, if there can be preservation involved on this site, why not? They're not adversarial at all towards historic preservation. If they can, make it work with what TCA, and that's a big if, they can make it work with what TCA is planning, then they're more than open to incorporating the historic building into the design. But having said that, we'll have to see if it, according to TCA, whether it will work within their design.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Vice Chair. And yeah, I see that as definitely a positive development. I'm very pleased to hear that. And again, just for some clarification here, TCAA, do they actually own that parcel now?
Not yet.
So
yeah, it's still.
Why are they? So I guess I'm still a little confused. Why are they pursuing all these plans and development ideas, and they don't even own the property yet?
Well, I guess, and I mean, my understanding is that they still do not own the property, but they have made arrangements or had agreements, in terms of intent to purchase, and so it seems like it's more just kind of a formality at this point. I'm sorry I can't kind of speak to the specifics on it, but it seems like at this point, yeah, they've made the commitment to purchase, and they have every interest and intent to follow through with that.
Sure.
So,
and I mean,
yeah.
I don't understand
Yeah.
those kinds of things, but it seems
Yeah.
like they've been talking about this for so long. It's
It
like,
has been going on a while.
okay,
yeah.
go
Yeah.
ahead and buy it. I mean, I don't know what they're waiting for. But again,
Yeah,
that's not our
Yeah, it's
decision.
outside of my.
But
my
at any rate,
purview.
thank you for the update, and I'm sorry to prolong the meeting, but that was an important topic, and
No,
I'm,
no, it was,
I'm
yeah.
pleased to hear that news. So thank you.
And I'll just say, just to save an email later, just Hayden Flour Mill, you all know that the development agreement was approved by council last month. Phase 2 of the environmental site assessment, which will include asbestos and lead paint testing, is kind of pending. So we've got a sampling and analysis plan that's just been approved by the city and historic preservation. And then, construction on the site is expected to begin in 2025. So you may have seen maybe 4 weeks ago, I want to say 3-4 weeks ago, the mayor held a press conference on the site to kind of kick off this project now that the development agreement was signed. So, there's obviously a lot of HP related plans related to that site. So, HPC is going to be needing to weigh in and approving certain elements of that plan. And then Gonzalez Martinez House, we're still pending the partial demolition of that building. So of course the non-historic portions of that building, a demolition permit's been submitted to the planning department, and just working out a few details before that can be issued. And then again, another Motley Design group, Bob Graham, kind of related project before Mr. Graham can be on site to make sure that partial demolition takes place under appropriate conditions and protects the building. So I think that's it.
Excellent. All right. Well, a very full agenda. Thank you, everybody, for persevering. There's a lot of good information, and really appreciate your work, Dr. Lechner, Dr. Antikari, and the staff. And unless there's any further questions or announcements from staff, no? Then I will make a motion to go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 8:38 p.m. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Have a good evening.